Hi, everybody. Hope you can hear us. We just got the stream started, so welcome. My name is Laura. I'm a software engineer at Prefect. Maybe you've seen me on some of our other videos in this channel or some other live streams, or maybe seen me in Slack. I have here with us today, I guess on this side, is Nicholas Brown. He's the senior front-end engineer at Prefect, and he's going to take us through how to contribute to Prefect's open source UI today. So Nicholas, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so this is pretty exciting for us because I've never had a co-host. If anybody saw Prefect's Twitter earlier, I posted a picture of the many monitors I have in my office right now to make this all work with us in 2 different places. So that's pretty exciting. So hopefully all the technology goes well.
My favorite.
Yes, yeah, definitely take a look at it. Maybe I'll put the link later because I have a monitor under my desk that is acting as a separate display for video input. So very exciting. For today's event stream today, we're going to be going through a bunch of different stuff, but I have also included the chat on the live stream too. So we're happy to take questions as we go along. So I just want to point that out now. I'll point it out a little bit later too, but feel free to say hi. Maybe I'll even, say hi in the chat, show everybody where we're at. So feel free to talk to us there. And, before we really get started, I'm going to kind of go over the agenda a little bit, just to make sure you all know what you're getting yourselves into. So again, I mentioned we're talking about contributing to Prefect's UI. So we're talking about front-end development. So this is actually pretty new for me. I mostly do Python development myself. I've done enough front-end to maybe be dangerous, but never really in Vue, only with React. So I am right there with you if you haven't really done a lot of that too. So Nicholas is going to be fielding all of your and all of my questions as we go. So step 1, as always, is going to be the dev environment setup. So there's some special stuff we need to do to make sure that we have the dev environment going for front-end development in Vue. So we'll make sure everybody has Prefect installed, make sure everybody can get the Node modules installed. If you haven't already installed Node and you want to follow along, you should install Node already, because we're not going to cover that specifically, but there's a ton of docs on the Node website about many ways that you could do that. And then we're going to show you how to run the UI in development mode. So this is different for the folks who are used to running the UI with Prefect Server Start. That uses a pre-built image with all of the Vue code already compiled. You can't edit it and see changes. So we're going to run it a different way so that you can actually see changes as you're developing on it. And then we have a little issue that we want to fix that actually has been a problem for a lot of people since Server was first open source. So specifically this issue number, but I'll pull it up on the screen when we get there and talk about why that's a problem. And then, the whole exciting thing is we're going to develop that solution live. Nicholas is going to hold my hand through it. And hopefully you guys can all follow along at home too. And then we're also even going to go so far as to open the PR on the Prefect repo. So this should also teach you a little bit, about that process as well. So that's what we've got planned for everybody. So let's just go ahead and get the demo started. So up here on my screen, I've got VS Code, though that's not that important yet, because the first thing we're going to want to do is make sure that we have Prefect installed, right, Nicholas?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay, I've hidden it behind in my other window. Let's open code over here. Yep. So potentially a lot of you already have Prefect installed, but or the source cloned already, but let's go ahead and do that while we're here. So I'm going to come over here. Let's make my screen a little bit bigger for everybody. Over here, grab this clone link, and then I'm going to make a little front end stream just to keep myself organized here. And I'm going to clone the prefect repo in here. So just do that really quick. You could use whatever prefect you already have installed if you already have it, of course. But we're just going from the beginning here. So give a little internet a chance to chug along. Okay, so over here now I've got my repo cloned, so we can take a look in here. We've got prefect, and I think the next thing you want to do is install prefect from our newly downloaded source.
That is correct.
So that is correct. Great. We're still on track, everybody. We haven't gone wildly off track. Okay, so to install prefect right here, I'm actually going to, in my case, I'm going to use Conda as my environment manager. Maybe you use virtual env or something else. So I'm going to create a new, what should I name it? I already have a couple other ones. Let's call it front end stream to kind of match this. And then I'm also going to set mine to be Python 3.7 because prefect works on Python 3.5, I think, and above. No, I think we dropped 3.5, 3.6.
I think it's 3.6 and above, yeah.
Yeah, 3.6. So get your 3.6, 3.7, or 3.8 going. So let me do that. I actually was testing this yesterday and forgot to put that in and got really confused when Python 2 had a bad time.
Oh, is that the default for Conda?
It is for my installation of Conda. I don't know if maybe I'm just old news and I need to get my Anaconda updated. So maybe all the folks out there who are better at updating their Anaconda can let me know if there's a better feature out there for us. But yeah, that's I classically make that mistake now. So this is, again, just creating the Conda environment. Again, you might be using some other package manager, and then we're going to install prefect from the source that we just downloaded from GitHub. I activated my Conda environment once it finally got together, and then I'm right now pip installing with pip install -e space dot from my prefect directory. So some output's going to be coming here, so I can actually make sure it doesn't move us. So right here is that pip install command. So that's inside my front end stream environment. So this is going to get prefect installed, the Python package. I'm going to be using that later to kind of showcase some stuff. But I guess from a pure front end development perspective, you don't necessarily need the Python package like installed every time, but you will if you want to test the front end against the actual back end. So that'll become more clear as we go along, but this is probably a normal step for most folks. But if you're really doing pure only front end, some sort of styling UI, maybe you could get away without it.
Yeah, I would say probably not, just because if you're trying to do anything, the console will just be littered with errors because it's just looking for the API and it can't find them. There's a way to silence those, but still it's going to be just throwing lots of 500 network errors because it just doesn't know what to do. So pretty much anyone that's going to be working on the UI is going to become really quickly a full stack developer, which is really cool.
Yeah, unless you can stomach a lot of errors, it sounds like, and are really going to isolate yourself to the front end. But yeah, that's true. That's probably not a realistic situation.
No.
So why don't we go over to VS Code really quick and just take a little look at what we've got. So I'm going to actually open, I have quite a few copies of Prefect installed on my computer right now, but let me open the one that we just cloned. All right, so here I am in VS Code. So we've got a couple top level directories here. And you may feel tempted to go into source, but actually we're going to go into server. So all of the code for all of the services, including the UI that are part of the orchestration layer that comes with Prefect core, is actually in this directory server. So let's go in there. And inside server, there's a couple different directories. And in our case, to get to the UI code, we need to go into services, and then there's a directory that says UI. So for example, if I, open up this README that's in this directory that I just opened up, this is the README for Prefect Server UI, and this is also where the current best info in terms of developing on the UI. We were talking earlier about how the official Prefect docs on development is very Python forward. This is where some of our stuff related to setting yourself up for development for the UI is actually in. So we'll, as Nicholas was mentioning, we'll be updating those other docs too to make that a little bit more top level, but you can always kind of dig down in here too. Once you find the directory, you can make some great progress.
Yeah, one thing to note here is that once we are finished in starting Prefect Server, we will be operating solely in the UI directory.
Right.
Where we'll have installed all of our local packages and where we'll start the server from.
Yeah. So let's actually get that process going. So let me clear this out a little bit, just to point out that the first thing that we're going to need to do now that we've at least gotten this far is to get the development dependencies for the actual UI installed. So I mentioned way at the beginning that you're going to need Node. So I already have Node pre-installed here, which also came with NPM. So Node is hopefully I don't butcher this too bad, Nicholas, sorry, but Node is effectively going to be like a backend JavaScript interpreter for us. So this is going to be able to run JavaScript for us, like in our terminal, whereas I think most people are used to JavaScript running in your browser. For example, this is a backend version of JavaScript, which people build entire applications just on that, though we're going to be kind of crossing the line between Node and front end. And then NPM is the package manager. I think it comes with Node, right? That's the news.
It does, yeah. It's the probably most widely used package manager for JavaScript.
I think there was some like package manager wars a couple of years ago. So
that's true with Yarn. And I believe there were a couple more, but NPM pretty much won out. I know some people still use Yarn. That's okay too. It's kind of apples to apples.
Sure. So in our case, we're going to do Npm Install, which is the step that is actually going to install our dependencies. And for folks who are curious, those actual dependencies are in this package.json file. So all of these kind of like key value pairs here are for some type of node module and some version requirement syntax here. So this is what, when we run npm install, it's going to be looking for this file, which also means that I need to make sure I'm in this directory so that when I type npm install, it knows where package.json is. So I'm going to go ahead and cd, because I really was only, I only navigated to the correct directory over here in my VS Code. So let's get to the right place. What did I say it was? Server, services. UI.
Perfect.
Cool. Okay, good.
Nailed it on the first try.
Nailed it. So this is where we're going to run npm install. And before I press hit, you'll notice that there's no directory in here called node_modules, but the news is going to be that after I've run this, there is going to be a directory called node modules that has all of these dependencies described in package.json in it. There she goes. So this might take a while. So maybe this can be an opportunity for Nicholas to talk to us a little bit about, what is the ecosystem? We've front-end development today. We talked about the package wars, but the package manager wars rather. But maybe you can talk a little bit about, why do we have all of these dependencies back here that we need to install, and like what are they going to do for us?
Sure. So, well, first I'll start off with why this is different than running the prefect server start as just why we don't include the UI when we run prefect server start when we're trying to do development. Which, have you started prefect server yet?
I have not.
Okay, cool. So when we get to starting prefect server, we're going to use a flag there that says essentially skip the UI node or skip the UI container. The reason we're doing that is Prefect Server ships with a set of built application files. This is because this step in particular, Npm Install and then Npm Run Server, which would be the front-end server of the application, take a really long time and are really resource intense. The reason they're resource intense is when we write modern JavaScript applications, we're writing them in a language that's significantly different than what the browser actually executes. This is for a variety of reasons, but the most pertinent one is that browsers are usually very behind the JavaScript ecosystem in the toolkits that they have. Some languages or some toolkits that you may have heard of are things like TypeScript or Babel.
Right.
And so TypeScript in particular is one that gives JavaScript the flavor of a more structured class-based language. And a lot of JavaScript developers, especially if they're coming from not JavaScript, really love using it because it provides a whole ecosystem of tools to provide to make really maintainable and readable code that is well tested and consistent. However, most modern browsers cannot run any of these modern tools, like I said.
Right.
So there's one step that every modern JavaScript application does to make sure that programmers can write the code they want to write, but browsers can also execute that code. And that's the transpilation or build step. And so that is what we actually shipped the result of that build step with Prefect Server, so that all we're doing is serving a bunch of static application files whenever you spin up that container. During that build step, what happens is basically just a translation of the code from a modern JavaScript tool system to what the browser can read, which is going to be like your very basic vanilla JavaScript. It often adds polyfills for browsers that don't have every feature available that you want to use. One of the most notorious or infamous ones is Internet Explorer,
Right.
that historically just doesn't have most of the features and flavors of JavaScript that you would need to make any sort of modern application. So that is what we're doing here. That is what the dev dependencies, or sorry, that's not what we're doing here. We're actually installing the dependencies. The dependencies are what can let us do this. There's a whole host of packages that just will take the flavor that you're writing in and give you this like beautiful modular structure in your code, let you write that, and then transpile it to a bunch of essentially gibberish. Oh, it looks like we've made some progress here. Where are we at?
We have, and I even went a step further. So we got all the node modules installed. So
Awesome.
We finished up with that. So now you'll see I do have this directory node modules over here that I didn't have before. And there's a ton of stuff in here, right? Tons and tons of files, right? This is like all the source for all of these dependencies in here, right? But that's what we just spent that whole time letting npm install do while we chatted out the situation of modern development. And then the thing that I ran next here is npm run server. You can see it right here. So this is another one that takes a while because this, correct me if I'm wrong, Nicholas, but the transpiling is happening right now, right? It's happening. So npm run server is going to do all the transpilation, and then it's also, is that what you say, transpilation?
I think so.
I think so. And then it's also going to serve the site so that I can access it on localhost. I think the port is 8080. We can actually see what it's going to run. Oops, sorry, my scroll went wild there.
So what's happening here is this is one of the famous or infamous tools, depending on whether or not you've used it, called Webpack. And so Webpack is in concert with the Vue CLI, is building the application, doing the transpilation, but also creating a dependency graph, I guess is the right way to say it, and allowing you to do in a hot reload is what it's called, in a live way, serve the application in a browser that's able to execute the code and also operate on the code. So essentially, we'll be able to make changes and view them without having to do the full build step. And that's because we're running this development server, which has created this graph. And we'll be able to very quickly rebuild the application without having to go through a full build step as it would in a production environment.
You'll see this big done up here that says it compiled successfully and tells me I have this app running at localhost 8080. So let's go check it out. All right, so getting a look here at the server UI. So potentially a lot of people have seen this before from the stream, but if you haven't, this is the UI for Prefect's orchestration layer. It comes with Prefect open source, this version that we're seeing now. And then this is actually based off of a managed hosted product that the company behind Prefect core has as well, called Prefect Cloud. So some people may use Cloud already who are on the stream. But this is the open source version. And I think the first thing, we kind of want to do here is jump into the dev tools, right? That's
definitely, yeah. Let's open the console and see what we see. We will see all those errors that I was talking about a little bit earlier.
Cool. So if you're new to this, what we're going to do is open the developer console for this browser. So I'm running Chrome. If you're using Firefox or Internet Explorer, I don't know, but if you're using some other browser, they should all have something like this. For Chrome, you can right click and click inspect, and that's going to open up, you can do it. There we go. That's going to open up DevTools. So you can configure it to open up in a separate window, which is what mine is doing right now. You can configure it to be docked to like the right or to the bottom of your current open window. So, it's kind of up to your taste. But, there's tons of docks and tricks that I don't know about how to use the various different dev tools. And, they vary a little bit per browser. But I think the first thing we want to do is click on this tab here that says console and take a look at the output that's going to this JavaScript console. So this is similar to like if you had print statements or logging statements in Python that went to standard out or went to some logging handler. This is the place that shows up for errors or other logs that are being emitted to the browser client.
And in this case, we are seeing a lot of output and a lot of errors. And those errors, if you look closely, they'll say something like error connection refused.
Yeah,
there we go.
Red one here.
Connection refused. And so what that is that's the application trying to communicate with an API that doesn't exist yet. Because we haven't started it. Am I correct?
Correct, yeah. So the situation, this situation we see here, it says there localhost 4200 GraphQL, I can't contact this. And so it's true, I don't have a GraphQL endpoint at port 4200 on my localhost that this can even talk to because I didn't start that service. So that is exactly what's going on. And to tie it back to the issue too, this is the error that people might, not see because they don't open their console and nothing, really tells you anything on the front end that's the issue. You do see maybe some hanging stuff and maybe you would get suspicious, but it's not that clear, why. So that's tying it back to the issue what we want to fix.
Definitely. And if someone doesn't know to look in the console, they are pretty in the dark here. I mean, I think the only giveaway here is that the upcoming runs little square tile there doesn't show anything because it just stays in a perpetual loading state.
Right. Okay, so I think maybe the first thing we'll show is, we were going to, at this point, start this service so that we can see this error not showing up, right? Shall we give it a go? I have to turn Docker on. This is the reason we installed Prefect way earlier when we did pip install -e to install Prefect. That is because we want to be able to use Prefect server start, which is the convenient little CLI command we have available to start the other services so that we can see stuff in the UI that's backed by the Postgres database, that's backed by the Hasura and GraphQL server endpoints, that's backed by the Apollo API layer, et cetera. So That's what's going on now. So in my second window here, I'm going to get back into my Conda environment because I start up from my base by default. So this is called front end stream, I think is what we went for. And then from here, I have Prefect installed, and I'm going to use Prefect server start. And then I think what we want to do is, so an important difference here is that we want to start this command without the UI, right? Because we're running the UI in development mode ourselves. That's what's happening in my terminal window up here. So we just want the other services. So there is a bunch of flags actually to do a bunch of different stuff, but to not start the UI, there's this convenient flag --no-UI.
And Laura, is I don't know if you have the images already on your local, but maybe we can do the skip pull flag as well to make sure we don't have to pull those from serve.
Is it just skip pull?
I believe that is the case. I can double check that for you right now.
I did start up earlier, but
--skip -pull, perfect.
Cool. So let's do that. Otherwise, we would also be pulling the newest version of the images that Prefect publishes on Docker Hub. So this, maybe will get us some extra network bandwidth. We'll see.
Every little bit counts at this point.
Every little bit counts. I know.
Scrounging for memory.
We are totally scrounging for memory right now.
There we go.
There we go. Movement.
We have liftoff.
Really makes you appreciate when you're not encoding all the time. Don't you just feel that way? You wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, I'm so happy my computer's not encoding right now.
Yeah, I breathe a sigh of relief every day that I don't have to encode some video to a live stream.
Can develop so fast. But it's part of the fun.
That it is. And these are some hiccups we'll get figured out over time. I think it's
for sure
some growing pains here.
It is some growing pains. Okay, so tons of Docker output as these services get started up. So we'll see, some output from the Postgres, from Hasura, which is on top of our Postgres, from Apollo on top of that, and it has to do some database migrations to make sure that the database has the tables that we need. Et cetera, and then there's also this scheduler process that gets started too. So this is what makes it possible for, if you have a scheduled flow, that's the process that's in charge of, checking what time it is and should I run this now, that type of thing. So you'll see some output from that service too.
We just saw the Apollo server has liftoff, and we can tell there that the upcoming run style is now loaded, and the console, if you were to refresh, would no longer have a plethora of errors in it, hopefully.
So I'm going to refresh this page, and then we're going to watch this console be different. Cool. So before we had like tons of errors that said, that were red and angry, but now our console is pretty clean.
Yeah, it's very, very happy with us now.
Yeah, but we can't really expect somebody to, check their console every time. We want them to be able to know that type of stuff from here.
That is true. And that is the reason that we are here today, essentially. We are going to be building a component for the dashboard that will allow a user to see if they have a healthy connection to their API.
So we've finally moved past setting up our development environment and running the UI in development mode, even going so far as to start the backend services so that we can see the whole stack. We can see we can interact with it as the whole stack is running. So now let's actually do the thing, right? That we came here to do.
Let's start.
Let's start. All right, so we're going to work on this issue, right? So I'm going to go ahead actually over here in my my VS Code, make a new branch, right? That's
that is the correct way to do this.
Good first hygiene step here.
That is true.
So I'm going to name it after this issue 2395 and call it API health check tile, right? This is we're going to make a health check, on whether the API server is accessible or not, and render it that in a little tile here. So that's what I'm going to call my branch. So let's
Perfect.
All right, and then I don't really need to see package.json anymore or README, but now we can get going. Nicholas, why don't you hold my hand here and teach me what to do?
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the dashboard. If you wanna go to the application right now.
Oh yes. Let's
take a look at what we have here. Okay, so this is the Prefect Server dashboard, and this is made of, as you can see, what is that? Five tiles essentially. Yeah. So the Prefect Server application is built in Vue, as the stream title suggests, which is a front-end framework, very similar to React or Angular or Meteor, if some of you folks are more familiar with those. Vue is typically made in large applications up of single file components, and components are kind of what we build together like Lego blocks to make the entire application. So each of these tiles on the dashboard here is made up of one to many components. In this case, I believe each of these is just one component, maybe with some imports here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by building our own single file component. So okay. Laura, if you want to go to the VS Code, and let's go to source there. And this is where all of the JavaScript and Vue files are located, or most of them, I believe. And then if you want to go to, let's see right there, let's go to pages.
Oh, pages. Okay, I am in pages.
And then you will see dashboard. And that dashboard.view represents the view that we have right there in your Chrome tab.
Okay, cool. And so this is going to be this basically.
Yep. And if you take a look at those files there in the dashboard directory, you'll notice one that corresponds to every single tile in this dashboard, and also one that is hidden right now because it's behind a tab. So you can see like the upcoming runs tile, the summary tile, the flow table tile, which is the one that's hidden.
Right. Oh, I see. You mean it's over here?
Yep. And then the flow run heartbeat tile, which is what we call the activity timeline, and then the errors tile. So there you go. Those are all of those. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new one of those. So let's start by just creating a new file in that directory.
Okay. Is there like a naming convention? I guess it's whatever with camel case here -tile. Right?
Yep. So I think for the main files here, we just do normal capital case or sentence case with -tile.view.
Gotcha.
So we can call this API health check -tile.view maybe.
Cool.
Perfect. And here we have
like one file. So intimidating.
So let's scaffold this.
Okay.
Out. So this is going to be a single file component, what's called in Vue, and this is going to be made of anywhere from 1 to 3 parts, and the 3 parts are going to tie much closer to what people are familiar with in HTML. They're going to be a set of script tags, a set of template tags, which are HTML, and then optionally a set of style tags. Sorry.
Okay.
And so let's start by doing open brackets, or open. That's a bracket, right? Yeah, there you go. So I think actually if you hit that view thing, it may auto-populate this for you, but let's not do that because I want to let everyone know like what it's like to write a full one from scratch.
Sure.
So what we'll do here is we'll say, let's see, open brackets, then script, then close brackets.
Close brackets.
There you go. And then do another open bracket, and then a /, and then script again, and then a close bracket, and that will close out that portion. And then let's hit enter there and add the same thing, but with template instead of script.
Okay.
And then I think we'll just leave it there for right now. We don't need to add any styling just yet.
Okay.
So perfect. So now we have sort of the very basic scaffolding. Now in Vue, template tags are not actually allowed to be empty. So let's just add a single div component there. So it'll look just like the template, but it'll just say div inside of it. Perfect. Okay. And let's put hello world in there because I think that's kind of the basic basic thing we're going to go for here.
Ah, so excited. Okay.
Yay! 50 million exclamation points.
Yeah.
Perfect. So now what we want to add inside the script tag is we want to say, well, I'll just do an enter there, a couple enters, and we'll say export default.
Just with no other syntax. Export.
Yep, just export, and then default, and then open and close brackets. Not the same ones you did before.
Yeah.
There you go, curly brackets. Perfect. And there you go. We have a fully functional single file component here for Vue.
Is this a thing I'm supposed to like tab in?
Yeah.
Stylistically? Okay.
That would be stylistic. And I think one of the things that we're looking to include in Prefect Server is a set of VS Code, what are they called, like configuration files, so that people will automatically have the prettier extension installed, which will do this automatically for you on save, and some other stuff like that. So we'll have that coming out pretty soon.
Cool. Yeah, I will say for the people who are watching that to get this syntax highlighting in Vue, I did install a VS Code extension called Vetter?
Yeah, Vetter, I think. Yeah.
It's at the bottom here. VETUR. Vetur. So, if you're not using VS Code, there's probably something for your other IDEs, but that's the one that I'm using here, just FYI.
All right, so now we have this done. Let's go back to the dashboard.
Dashboard.vue, you mean?
Perfect, yeah. Sorry, dashboard.vue.
Gotcha.
And we're going to see, similar to all the ones up there, we're going to import.
Okay.
Let's just say API health check tile. The same format as we have above there. No dash, though, because that would be syntactically incorrect. And then we'll do some single quotes at /pages/dashboard/ API health check -tile, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
And you do not need to add the file extension there because Vue will automatically add that for you.
Cool.
Okay, so perfect. We've got that ready. Now we need to import it, or we need to add it to the components list for the dashboard component, because the dashboard is itself another component that we're importing it into. So now we'll add that same API health check tile that we imported to this list. We just add it at the end right there.
Seems easy. Cool.
Perfect. Now, if we go back to, if we save that and go back to the application, it's actually going to complain to us because we're not using it anywhere.
Complain to us like
back here?
Okay, here's what you're talking about.
There it is. So it says API health check tile or a component has been registered but not used, and that's because
it shows up here too in this like overlay. That's useful.
Yeah, it's very nice. You don't necessarily always have to look at the terminal to see these errors. Okay, so let's go back to the dashboard.vue file.
Okay.
Okay, so now we've registered this component in components, but we haven't used it anywhere in the template. So let's go down to the template tag.
Oh, I see. Because we're basically in the script tag of dashboard right now, right?
That is correct.
I see. Here on line 80, that ends, and now the template tag starts.
Yep. And so everything that was above that was the methods, the data, everything that's involved in creating the dashboard component. And so here we can see, let's keep scrolling down just a little bit.
Okay.
We see the tabs. These are all other components. And so these are just HTML things. And here we get to, if you stop, we are at the tiles. Up just a hair there.
Oh, I went too far?
Yep, just a little bit. There you are. Okay.
Oh, I see. Summary tile, failure style, upcoming run style, flow, heartbeat tile, error style.
So there you are. Now we are looking at all the tiles that we're seeing on the dashboard there. Why don't we go ahead and just quickly add, just insert a line below that one.
Okay.
And let's do the same thing we did with the template tile, except for let's do it with our API health check.
So I need the slot thing probably, right? Or not yet?
Yeah, not yet. We don't need that just yet. So let's just close those brackets there.
Okay.
And so one thing that you may notice is we don't always have to include a second matching tag at the end. We can do a shorthand syntax where we just add that / at the end and just close the bracket.
Gotcha.
What that will mean is that there's going to be nothing underneath that node in the HTML DOM.
Yeah, seems pretty hip to do here.
Yep, that's what all the cool kids are doing. Okay, so now if we go back to the dashboard, it will no longer be complaining to us.
Nice.
Beautiful. However, we don't see hello world. Oh no, it's a disaster.
Oh, it is a disaster. Is this a planned disaster?
It's a planned disaster. That's why
Okay, good.
So
Too many disasters today.
So the reason that it's not showing up is because we inserted that component into another set of node components, which is a layout. So a layout, what it does is if it doesn't have a default slot, which this one does not, it will only render the things which are named, which have named slots, and it knows where to put them. In our case, we haven't told it where to put it yet, or where to put the component just yet. So we're gonna have to do a little modification here to make sure that we are making things move around as they should be. So I actually have that here. I already have that done because we don't really want to have to go worry about figuring out where this goes.
Sure.
Let me double check here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to move. If we go back to the dashboard here, and we're going to put our brand new tile to the right of that errors tile that we see right there. We're going to make that one smaller, and we're going to put our errors tile right next to it. So to do that, we're going to actually move the slot of the errors tile. So if you go back to slot there, the slot that we're going to move it to is row-2, column-2, row-2, tile-1. So all you got to change is that one thing to 2. Perfect.
Okay, so there's some sort of grid system going on here that
there is.
Call row tile thing translates.
Yeah, and that gives us the flexibility to have components that have varying heights and make sure that they're all the same height, and to add and remove components as we need to. And this is just a very generic tile layout that lets us do that. So we use this in quite a few places throughout the application, and this is kind of
this slot grid thing like from Vue directly, or is it like from something else?
No, this is actually something that we made. So if you go to the directory over there, we can take a look at exactly what this is, and go to layouts, just 2 directories up. There you go. Then we go to tile layout.
Tile layout.vue.
Yep, perfect.
Okay.
Okay, and so here, if you scroll down, you can see a slot tag. You see slot name equals.
Oh, yes, this.
And so that's how we know where we're placing the component.
Oh, okay. I
so
see.
This comes with a lot of, like you said, it comes with the grid system and the spacing and the styling that we kind of want all of our components to adapt to automatically without having to worry about that every single time we build a component.
Right.
And so I believe, are finished compiling, and we should see since we moved our error tile, it should be smaller now. Perfect. So that's the slot we wanted to put it into, and we're going to put in that little empty square there, we're going to put our new component. So let's go back to the dashboard.vue file.
Okay.
And now in the API health check tile, we're going to add a slot tag.
I feel like I can see
slot attribute.
I can see the system. I think it's going to be a 3 here.
Let's see.
Maybe?
Nope.
No.
Oh, because if you think about it, that's actually the same row. So it's actually going to be call 2, row 2, tile 2.
Oh, 2. How does this work? Row 2 is, I guess, this row?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Then call 2, isn't that this? Is it this column?
So this has a special little grid here because that activity timeline to the left can have infinite height, essentially. And so it has its own special column, which is column 1. And then these other 2 to the right there have column 2.
Okay.
And so that's where that comes from. There could be
that.
multiple rows that match up with that activity timeline. So it could be, so that's what we're seeing here. So let's go back there and let's see. So that shouldn't be tile, that should be tile 2.
Tile 2, okay.
So what happens if you put it in the same slot? I believe the second one will just overwrite it. So we would have seen only our new tile. So let's make sure that all looks good.
Row 2, call 2, row 2, tile 2. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. And we should see hello world. Beautiful.
Yeah, it's not as pretty as the other ones though.
Yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later.
Okay, we're getting there.
Just if we go back to the dashboard.view file here, I just want to explain something that you did that some of the viewers may not understand. So you added another attribute there called full height.
Yes.
And so that was copying the ones above it.
Right.
We don't actually need that for this one. That's a property that we would build into the component that I don't think we need to.
Yeah, because actually failures tile and flow run heartbeat tile don't have it either. I was just totally going off errors tile.
Yeah, so that is a property that we would pass into the component that the component can operate on and do something based off. And in those cases, it's making sure that those tiles always stay the same height no matter what. In this case, we don't care about that right now. We can worry about that later if we so choose. Cool. So awesome. Now we are ready to dive into our brand new component, our health check component. Let's go back to that file.
Hey, everyone. We're back here to re-record after a couple technical difficulties with the stream. So if you were with us there, thank you for coming by. And if you weren't, now there is going to be a fresh new version of it that Nicholas has kindly joined me again to do. So I've got myself set up from where I left off earlier, where I had the hello world going on in my little slot down here. And what we kind of want to do now is to actually recognize that we've time traveled to the future and that this does actually already exist in master, the feature that we were working on. And how we're actually going to do it this round is that I'm going to pull this up over here in VS Code, our master branch that actually has this installed, and Nicholas is going to give us a little tour, and I may interrupt you and ask questions about stuff, but then we can sort of walk from the top down. And then if we need to kick anything like our server in the back or whatever, I have it all set up, so we can definitely do that.
Perfect.
So let's hit it.
Okay, so again, hi everyone for the second or third time. Just to preface this, one thing that we did in the meantime to remove some of the little obstacles and hiccups that we had was to install the Prettier extension in VS Code,
yes,
which will help with auto formatting. That's going to be the one by Esmond Peterson, and that will really help with all the JavaScript and Vue formatting and linting issues that we were seeing originally. So you don't have to worry about spaces and stuff. Then in your VS Code settings, you can turn on auto format on save, which will just remove a lot of the headache
that's this one
that you might experience. All of the files for configuring Prettier already exist in the UI project, so that should be ready to go. That will tell you like number of spaces, tabs, all the little syntax things that no one really cares about. Okay, sweet. So for now, that view file.
Yes. So shall I check out master now? Shall I go for it?
Yeah.
And check out the fully cooked version. So here we go. Here's API health check tile.view. But in my previous example, in my previous file, what we were working on before, it just had hello world. But here's the totally cooked version. Maybe we can even go over here and give this a refresh of my compiled stuff.
Which, for anyone who was paying attention before, I know that we went over that the Npm or the node server gives us hot reloading, which should technically automatically reload the browser window. One of the caveats to that is when there are large changes, particularly when they come from Git versioning, the hot reload system doesn't always work as well as you'd hope.
Sure.
It gets very overwhelmed with tons of changes at once. So that's why often you'll have to do a manual refresh for that. Sometimes if the changes are extensive enough and it has problems rebuilding the dependency tree, you will have to stop the server and rebuild the project. So that's in case anyone runs into that, I think that's something good to know.
Yeah.
Is that it's not a perfect hot reload given the extensive dependency tree that it has to build for any node project. Okay.
Gotcha.
So let's start at the top of this file here. And I think we can just go line by line and explain what's going on. And we'll probably end up jumping around just a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. So first we start in the script tag at the top. That as we went over, just denotes that this is a JavaScript executable section of the file in a single
Right.
file.
So we've got a script section and a template section in our case. So we set up with Hello World. Gotcha.
Exactly. And we could also have a style section, which would give our CSS, or in our case, SCSS, somewhere to live. So one of the really beautiful things about Vue and modern JavaScript frameworks in general is that we can modularize all of our front-end code and keep these single file components that are just all encapsulated. That gives your logic, your DOM tree, and your styling all in one place, which is really nice.
Gotcha.
Okay, so the first line of this is import card title from components card title. This is a pre-built component that we use throughout the Prefect application. And this just gives us some pre-built styling and formatting to card titles, which is something you see on, I think, every single one of those cards on the dashboard, and you'll see it.
Specifically, you mean these little titles like 0 errors and API status, right?
Exactly, yeah. And so these are, if you think about them in the way you might think of classes in Python or in Java or in some other language, these are extendable pieces of code. In our case, extendable pieces of code and also document formatting. So we can say, okay, there's a slot for everything. There's a slot for the title itself. There's a slot for the icon. There's a slot for the icon color. And that's how we make sure that all of our cards have the exact same formatting, but provide the flexibility to add things. For example, in the upcoming runs tile, you see there's some tabs there, so you can switch between upcoming and late runs. In the errors tile, you see there's a drop down for the time period with which we're looking for errors. So all of those are built with the exact same card title component that we have extended to include whatever we want. In this case, a couple of other components, whether they're custom or from the Vue.js library.
Gotcha.
And so if you go down in the file, we can actually look at what that looks like in this pre-built component, or this already built
that
component.
Should be way
right there. It'll be in the
here,
template.
right?
You see there, the way that we specify that in the template is by calling card title, and then you have the reactive properties that we pass into the component. In this case, loading, icon color, and then within the card title, we extend the title slot, I believe. Yeah, the title slot, and we kind of make it our own to add a couple of custom error messages there and some icons there, and give us a little bit more functionality than would just be taken out of a string property, which is what the title normally would be, just passing in a string.
Gotcha.
And so the way that we actually tell this Vue component that this is available is we import it at the top, as we saw earlier. And then in the export default components card title, we actually specify that this is a component available for use here.
Okay. So we need these three things. We need to import it, then we need to include it in this export default section, and then wherever we actually want it in to show up in terms of the HTML, that goes in this template part like this.
Exactly. So you can think of the 3 steps as importing into the file, registering with our local component,
Gotcha.
and then rendering in our template, in our DOM.
Gotcha. Okay.
Awesome. So let's go to the next line of the file.
Okay.
So this is
3.
line 3.
Line 3.
So HTTP endpoint equals process.m view app GraphQL HTTP. Bit of a mouthful. So const, for those unfamiliar with JavaScript, this is a way to declare a variable. So JavaScript has 3 different ways of declaring variables. That's const, let, and var. Var is what you'll see in much of the Stack Overflow questions. It is the old way of declaring variables. It is very much discouraged now due to some scoping limitations and the fact that JavaScript hoists variables to the top of execution. Var will always declare a variable in a global scope. And so that,
I see.
For anyone that,
weird.
Yeah, it gets very, very odd. If you've run into this before, you know it can be incredibly confusing to debug, and you can have overwritten variables and have no idea why that's the case. In this case, we declare const in the scope of this component, and we say HTTP endpoint. Const means that this cannot be rewritten. This variable can never be overwritten anywhere. And it cannot be redeclared within this scope.
Okay.
And then in contrast to that, let is limited to the scope the context within which you are, and can be overwritten as often as possible. So it's much more variable.
Flex.
Yes.
Right.
And so the interesting thing here is process.env.
Okay,
For
right.
those who are unfamiliar with Node, this is the way that you can get things from the Node process. Whatever the context is that exists there is declared on process. And so in this case, we're looking for the environment, an environment variable, process.env. And in that object, we have a variable declared called Vue app GraphQL HTTP. The only thing notable about this is the prefix there, Vue _ app, tells a Vue application to load this environment variable. Anything that's not prefixed with that will be unavailable in the Vue application. So that's just kind of one of the weird nuances of Vue. In a normal Node application, every variable would be available within process.env.
I see. So there's an environment variable in our wherever we're starting the server from called Vue _ app _ blah, blah, blah. And then special case of Vue is that it has to start with Vue _ app, or Vue is going to pretend it never sees it.
Exactly. It will never load it into the process. And that is I believe that's a security feature.
Yeah.
It's so your front end or whatever application doesn't just automatically load everything you have in the environment.
Right.
It can also just be a matter of why would you need all of that? So this is kind of gives some specificity, which I know Python users love, that, being very declarative with what you
explicit is better than implicit.
Exactly. Yeah, it's in the Python
which
Bible.
we all tattoo on ourselves, right?
I've got 3 actually.
Like 5 of them. Yeah, right. Okay.
Awesome. So now we get to the meat of the component itself. So the export default just tells us that this is something that is exported, and it's kind of doesn't really matter right here. You'll see that in every single Vue component that has.
And that's just like a JavaScript import export type syntax, like ES6. Okay.
Exactly. That is exactly what that is. And so within the export default, within a Vue component, you have a number of reserved properties. In this case, components is one of them. Data. Computed.
Scroll.
Let's see, we have Apollo, which is added as a reserved to the context by the Vue Apollo plugin. Okay. And there are a few others that probably don't really matter for this.
Yeah, that's all we got for this one.
Yeah, I think that's all we have for this, right? Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
So we already went over the components block. Let's go over the data block. I think one of the most important pieces of information to understand about Vue are reactive properties. So this is kind of where the magic of a front-end framework happens. Reactive properties are a way for you to define something that you want Vue to keep track of in its internal systems through a series of getters and setters and then watchers. Essentially, you declare some sort of property, some sort of variable, and you say, hey, Vue, keep track of this for me. If anything happens with this variable, if it changes, if it's updated, I want you to re-render the portion of the component that Vue, anything that looks at this, I want you to re-render this. I want you to do something with this. And that can be as simple as declare a variable here in interpolated syntax in the template, render that variable. Render hello world.
Yes, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the most straightforward usage of that. But that can get a lot more complicated, as we're doing here in the computed section. These are all just reactive properties: card color, card icon, connecting. And these reactive properties change based on other reactive properties, which makes this just a world more
complex.
Yeah. And so it says, in those good examples, card color, it will change based on connected and connecting properties. If connected changes, this will go through the full reactivity cycle. It will update all of its watchers and all of its dependencies to make sure that every one of them gets an updated version of this. Same thing with this .connecting, which is another computed property right there.
Right, because down here, line 32.
Exactly. And that can be even based on some other, that's based on error and retries and max retries. So all of this combined becomes a really powerful way for us to have a stateful front-end application that is cohesive, I think. It really lets us build some powerful components, as we've done right here with maybe 150 lines or something like that. Okay, so let's go back to the data. Sorry,
Okay, yeah. And maybe said another way, like these things like card color, card icon, they kind of act like these, except the syntax is a little bit different because they're going to have this logic associated with them, whereas these data ones have some scalar value at this point. They may be changed by other processes, but when we like first define them, they're actually defined as these specific values.
Exactly. I think the way that you can think about these is that these data props can be used as traditional variables might be. They can be set from other places and then retrieved in the same way as variables might be. And the computed ones, they have, looks like 3 properties that they can take on, or three values that they can take on based on other properties. And so they will always return those based on that. You can extend this functionality to include a lot more than just that. There can be getters. You can define your getters and setters explicitly if you would like, but we didn't need to do that. That gets a lot more complicated, I think. Than
Sure.
But yeah, so in the data,
there's a future, an advanced future where we do that. Okay.
Exactly.
I'll stay here for now.
Extreme. So we've defined a number of variables there. The GraphQL URL, as we see, is just set to the HTTP endpoint that we've declared earlier. The reason that we do that is the HTTP endpoint is a constant declared outside of the scope of the component. So the component is essentially doing the same thing as registering the card title right there. It's registering the HTTP variable with the component and saying, hey, this is what the value of GraphQL URL needs to be, so that we can now make that a reactive property and do something with it. And so we have a number of other ones there: connected, error loading, max retries, skip, and error message. We'll see kind of all of these later. I don't want to belabor them right now. So
Sure.
So let's go down to the computed properties and give a quick overview of those. We have card color, card icon. Both of those are primarily used for styling in the template. To if the connected status or the connecting status is a certain way, we want to render it green or gray or red, so that at a glance someone can tell what is going on here. The same thing with the card icon. They're all very tied to what the status of the overall component is. And then connecting is just a piece of logic that says if there's no error and the number of retries is less than the number of maximum retries, then we return true, so we consider connecting to be true. And then many of the parts of the component are based on that.
Gotcha, because we use this in these card icon and card color to decide for gray or for signal cellular connected no internet 4-bar.
A very explicit icon name right there.
And Nicholas told me earlier, but in this case, success and failed are both kind of aliases that we have in the prefect SCSS that basically maps to a specific type of red, or red for failed, and a specific type of green for success. And then gray is just like, it's just gray, just normal gray.
Yeah, and so they're all 3 of those are the same case. So we've mapped all of those.
Gotcha,
in this case, success and failed are prefect branded hex codes. And the gray is another class, but it is not a prefect branded gray. We actually have a gray that is a prefect branded called canceled, which would be canceled anywhere throughout the application.
And then these strings here are lining up with icons that come with Vue, come with something else?
These come with material icons, which is the material design suite of icons by Google.
Gotcha. Okay. Right. Because we look googly over here.
We look very googly. I think
look pretty googly.
We follow the material specs very closely with our own flavor.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay, so now we can get to, I believe, the final section of the component.
Yes, it is.
Which is Apollo. And so what Apollo is Apollo actually exists in a few different places in our application, full stack, not just in the front end, but it also exists in the back end. And Apollo is a number of different things, but for our purposes, it is the client through which we communicate with the API. So it is just handles all of the logic for doing post requests, and actually that's all it does is post requests, and then error handling and caching. And it really takes that off our plate, so we don't have to worry about it. In our case, we just define Apollo here. We just say, hey, this is going to be an Apollo block, and we're going to have one query in it right now. I believe we just have one called hello.
Yes.
And so this hello query is the way that we determine whether or not our API is up. So it's a very simple query. It doesn't even hit the database layer. It just says, hey, is there an API listening? If so, return something. So the first line of that hello query is query :require at GraphQL dashboard hello.graphql or .gql. What this is a node way of saying, get me this file, and then declare it here and do something with this file. So for us, it's get this GraphQL dashboard hello file, which if you want to open that, I think that'll help understand what's kind of going on.
And just to back up a little bit to what you said, by saying this is a node way, you mean that this require word, that looks kind of like, I don't know, function looking thing here. That's the node way of saying, can you go find this file and import the stuff?
Exactly. So contrary to the way we did it up above at the top of the file, which is import.
Right, because we were doing this type of thing.
Exactly. And so believe it or not, the import is not actually a node way of doing it. This is one of the extendable things that developers have added to the node sort of environment, but that is actually not valid node JavaScript to do import. It requires the correct way to do that. Yeah. And so the way that you would do this inline essentially is to use require, but they do essentially the same thing.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can go find this file over here in my UI source, click it right, GraphQL, then dashboard, and then hello.gql, looks like this.
Perfect. And if you want to get some sort of syntax highlighting for GraphQL, you can. There's a number of syntax highlighters in the VS Code library. Or
just shut up, my little extension blob was like, hey, you want to do this? And I was like, no, shut up.
No, leave me alone. So that's fine, and it's very useful for especially more complicated queries that you want to make. In this case, we have 3 lines here. Just query, open, close, mustache, parentheses, hello. And so this makes up the backbone of our component, actually, is this 3 lines. This is what will ping the API and say, hey, run this query, give me this information. And then if we get something back, that tells the component that we're good to go. So let's go back to the towel there.
Cool. And maybe one other thing I'll say is for people who don't do much or GraphQL, this is the format, the syntax of a GraphQL query. So that's, just what it looks like as opposed to like a REST endpoint. This is what the GraphQL endpoint request basically looks like. So
exactly,
it looks, very simple in this case too, but also I think that can, kind of trip people up a little bit. So
yeah,
that's what's going on there.
And for those that may be coming from the REST space, the difference between a GraphQL API and a RESTful API are that RESTful API has a number of endpoints that you configure, and they're explicitly configured, and the user must know those endpoints and then hit an endpoint with a GET request to get some data, or hit an endpoint with a POST request to post some data, and yada yada. Contrast that to a GraphQL API. There is a single route that exists, usually /GraphQL, and all requests that come into that route are post requests. The route only receives post request, and within the body of that post request is what we just saw, a query of some sort. And the query tells the API what to do, whether it is to retrieve some data, whether it is to mutate some data, which is the difference between a query and a mutation, or whatever else there's a lot of available options, but everything is
Sure.
done in the body of that post request to /GraphQL. And the same is true of our
Gotcha.
GraphQL API. So there's a little background on for anyone that's a little bit unfamiliar or is coming from RESTful and doesn't know the difference. And the GraphQL docs are amazing. They're really, really great. So if you want to read up on it, there's a reason a lot of people use GraphQL APIs now. Okay, so we've seen where we've required that file. And so that will tell the Apollo plugin to, hey, run this query against the API. And here in the result handler, we have
Which goes all the way down to here, I think. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And so in that, we have a whole bunch of logic. The first line is if on the data argument, there's a loading property set to true, then return. If this data is loading, don't do anything with it, because that means that this isn't ready for us to look at to determine if this is valid for our component.
Gotcha.
And that is because we are getting fragments of queries. So Apollo handles requests in many different ways. And one of them is that it can hit caches, or it can hit the network, or it can do both. And it will return to you any number of configurations of those. And in our case, we've told it, give us everything. But for us, if it's still loading, we don't want to do anything with it.
Gotcha.
So the next lines we say, this dot connected, which is how this dot is how we reference something in the component scope. In this case, one of the reactive properties that we mentioned, or that we declared earlier. So if this dot connected,
12 up here.
There it is. If this dot connected, or this dot connected equals, so this is where the syntax is kind of funny for people who are not familiar with JavaScript. So let's break it down. So the exclamation point says the falsy value of this. So the opposite of this. The falsy value of data (?) So let me explain that. Data .error is how you might access an object property. And so we're looking at the error prop on the data object. The question mark is a proposed feature that we're using a plugin to expose called optional chaining. Optional chaining allows us to access data.error even if data doesn't exist. It will stop this right here and say, okay, if data doesn't exist, we're not going to throw an error because we're trying to access a property on a thing that doesn't exist.
That doesn't exist, yeah.
Yeah, and so this allows us to much more concisely represent the access pattern of deeply nested objects.
Gotcha. So, yeah, because I think you were telling me earlier, otherwise you would need a bunch of like nested, like if data and or and data.error or whatever, and that gets annoying to write, I guess, over the years.
Right, and even for this quite small access, it would be data and data.error and hello in data.data.
Yeah.
So we would have to do all of that just to say that what we could do here in 2 statements.
Right.
And that balloons very quickly the more deeply nested your object is. So that's why that looks really weird. Once you get used to it, it becomes incredibly powerful. And it's just, I can't wait for it to be implemented in actual JavaScript. It sucks that we have to use a plugin, a Babel plugin right now, but
to use it, yeah,
it's brilliant. It's really nice. So we say if there's no error on the data object, or data.error is false, and hello exists in data.data. That's a very Pythonic way of expressing this. In fact, it's not a very JavaScript way, but it is possible in JavaScript. So essentially, if the hello property exists in data.data and there's no error, we consider ourselves to be connected.
Gotcha.
Similarly,
this is what we would expect from a successful one of these. Okay, gotcha.
Exactly. So a successful query of the hello route will return data.data.hello.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it will not return data.error.
Not an error. Gotcha.
Right.
Okay. Check that.
Conversely, this .error is equal to data.error. error. So there's an error. Now we handle that. So if there is an error, so if this.error equals true, then we start some retry logic, and we say this.error message, which is the variable that we're storing whatever error returned, to let us know, was there.
That's a reactive prop up here, right?
Exactly. And so we use that somewhere in the component where we render that. So we say, hey, if there's an error, update our error message property with whatever the body of that error is, whether it's like a network one or maybe a misconfigured endpoint or yada yada. So we set that, and then we say, and then we have our retry logic. So we declared above retries and max retries. Retries was instantiated to 0, and max retries, I believe, is 10 or something like that.
Yeah, let's see. It is 10, correct.
10, perfect. Okay, so we say, hey, if the number of retries is less than or equal to the number of max retries, increment retries. So go up.
Sure, yeah.
And then do nothing. Else, if we're at the number of max retries, whether equal to or above it, we say this.skip equals true. That's another variable that we declared, another reactive property we declared. And it tells us, if we look on line, I believe 62 to 64.
Let's get a little room here, down here.
There it is. That is an Apollo plugin specific or Apollo client specific property that says, hey, skip this query. And you can define any amount of logic there. So don't make this query. And in our case, we say, don't make this query if this.skip equals true. So in our case, we're saying, skip this query now, and then we set a timeout. We set a timer essentially for 10 seconds, but there's 10,000 milliseconds right there, so 10 seconds.
Right here.
After which we reset our retries and then make this.skip equals false. So that tells us to restart the query, like start polling for this query again. So this provides us some very clean retry logic for when we can't connect to the API. And this gives you time to restart your API or maybe check your network connection or something without just being flooded with bad.
Right. Gotcha. So 47 to 48 here is just to keep incrementing the retries, but then once we get to 10, then, or whatever max retries is, then we set skip to true, which works along with this magical Apollo thing to make Apollo stop asking that endpoint or asking that query anymore. And then we set a timeout for 10 seconds, under which we'll set the retries back to 0 and set skip to false. So now this magical skip thing isn't going to be skipping anymore. I'm going to use the word skip a billion times here, but isn't going to be skipping anymore. And then we just go back into this until it works or we hit the retry logic again.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this provides us with this tile, essentially. This is what allows us to display at all times what the status of the API is, because this logic will go indefinitely. Yes.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned the magic skip method there. And so this is another really powerful part of having reactive properties and a Vue letting watchers, in this case is a watcher, know that something has changed. So it's gonna run this skip method on every time Apollo tries to run this query. It's gonna run the skip method first. And
check. I see.
Exactly. And so whatever this returns, it's gonna say, oh, okay, well then I shouldn't even continue. I'm gonna abort the process right now. And that ties into the line 61 right there, poll interval. So we have poll interval 1000. And so that means we're going to run this query every 1000 milliseconds. So that's what provides us with the final loop to make sure that this component is always up to date with what the API status is we run this every second unless skip equals true.
Right, which we handle up here with the timeout.
Exactly, within the result of the property. And the result will run always, whether there's an error or whether there's not an error. Whether we actually get some data back.
Gotcha, yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I believe there's a couple of the lines here we haven't discussed. So line 60, loading key is loading. This is an interesting mechanism that Apollo uses where you have you tell Apollo what the variable on your component to use for loading. In this case, ours is called loading. Very creative. We instantiate loading to equal 0 at first.
Here, yeah, it is.
And every time Apollo makes some query or enters internally a loading state, it will increment that whatever that loading key is by 1.
I see. So we're going to start at 0 at the beginning, and then every time Apollo tries to say hi, hit this hello, it's going to make this number go up.
Exactly. And then similarly, every time that it gets something back and it is no longer internally in a loading state, it will decrement that variable. So it will subtract.
Okay. So we can know if it's on 0 or not 0, whether we have an active query in flight.
Exactly. And when this becomes really powerful is when you have multiple queries, they can all access that same property, that same loading key. And so rather than keeping track of 4 or 5 X number of queries in flight with separate variables, you have one central key that is incremented and decremented every time something's happening. And so anytime it's above 0, you know that there's something loading, and you can do something globally with that as you see fit. And so obviously there are times when you do want to say, hey, just a single query is loading. But then there are other times when you need all the data returned, for example, before you can do anything with any of the data. So that covers the loading key. Then we have the fetch policy and then the return partial data. These are the things that I talked about earlier. So the fetch policy is how Apollo knows where it can look for the data that you've asked for in the query. So Apollo has some very complicated and good caching mechanisms internally that will say, hey, if the data hasn't changed, just return things from the cache right away. And so it's obviously a very fast way of handling this.
Sure.
In our case, though, the data will really want that. We really don't want to hit a cache because this is supposed to be whether the network is up, whether we have something pulling from the network. And so in this case, we say fetch policy is network only, bypass the cache at all times.
Gotcha, yeah.
And the return partial data true is another Apollo specific thing that we kind of mentioned earlier, and that's to make sure that we're getting every piece of data that comes back. So we're always running that result handler, whereas otherwise we'd only run it when something has changed.
I see. So this is controlling how often result is getting called.
Exactly.
In the back.
Exactly.
And then maybe also peeling all of this apart into pieces. This whole Apollo section is part of this Apollo Vue plugin that we have installed. This whole thing here really is all inside this hello section, which is configuring this specific hello query, basically, which we first say, hey, this is the query you should actually run for this thing. And then here's the result callback, basically, that you should run result handler whenever that query is done. And then this is a bunch of extra configuration. Some of it's kind of specific to our situation, like the network only thing, specifically for this query that's relevant. And then some of this is about how often to pull and when to skip, et cetera, that gets used in our result handler.
Precisely. Yep. Very good summary.
Gotcha.
And so that is the end of our component. As far as the logic goes, that will give us everything we need to know for rendering. And so let's go into the rendering a little bit. I know that's I think the logic makes a lot of sense to programmers, and I think the rendering is often the most intimidating part of this if you're not super familiar with HTML and CSS, and especially in a front-end framework, the way that these interact with what we just described is mysterious in many ways, I think. So as I think you mentioned earlier, it was magical. So hopefully we can demystify it just a little bit. So in Vue, the way that this works, and I believe the same thing is true in React and in Angular as well, and probably whatever other modern front-end frameworks, are the front-end engine, in our case Vue, does some really powerful interpolation and manipulation of the DOM, the document object model, using the special syntax that we define in this file. In this case, these are all scoped to this single component, and really everything that we described up above is accessible to the template right here.
Stuff in here, yeah.
Exactly. It's accessible to the visual component, which is what the template is.
Because I can see some stuff, it's not necessarily looks exactly the same because it's in this sort of HTML looking place, but like card color, card icon, this loading thing, connected, that's all stuff that we have from up here, that we define stuff about up here.
Exactly. And so one notable syntax difference here that I think is obvious right away is we don't have to access these variables using this, because the template is always scoped to the component. So there's no reason for that.
That's what I see.
As opposed to the component itself, we access the variables using this because we can access out of scope, quote unquote, out of scope properties and variables, things like we've imported or constants we've declared, or perhaps things we just know are globally available. That allows us to use those in the component, but the same is not true of the template. The template can only access things that are within scope of the component.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. That's what part of what this is about, probably.
Exactly.
This HTTP endpoint thing.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Otherwise, that HTTP endpoint would not be available to the component. It wouldn't have any way of seeing it because it's just can't see it. It's out of scope.
Right.
So the way that there are two ways that we tell the Vue engine that we're trying to access a component property. The first way is through the colon attribute access pattern, which we see right there with color. Exactly. Yeah. So the colon is the magic colon attribute access pattern and says, hey, whatever is in this attribute, this is something JavaScript related. This is something you need to be looking at for whatever's in the middle there. In this case, we say color equals card color. And so it tells Vue, hey, take a look at the card color reactive property that you have stored.
Okay, so this colon is like really important if the thing that is over here for this attribute is part of your component.
Exactly. Without the colon right there, this will be evaluated as a string.
Gotcha. It's just like HTML or something, I guess.
Exactly, and it can be anything HTML related then, but there will be no reactivity to that. So when it changes, nothing's going to happen because it doesn't know to change. And so we see the same thing there. We see with loading. So colon loading equals loading greater than 0. So that's our loading key that's incremented and decremented earlier that we talked about.
Gotcha. So we can put like stuff that will evaluate in here as long as we have this colon.
Exactly. And so what that colon does is that gives us all the power of a JavaScript within that attribute. All the power.
Nice. It's so small but so powerful.
And so the same is also true if we look. Let's see. I believe there's a vif. Yeah, if you look at the vif on line 79.
79. Oh, I see right here.
So anything, there are a number of reserved attributes that Vue looks for, and they're always going to be prefixed by v dash, and that does essentially the same thing as the colon. And it says evaluate this as JavaScript.
Gotcha.
And in that case, it is specific to something that Vue will do with this component. In this case, show or hide it. It's an if-else statement in the attribute.
Oh, okay, sure. It's an if.
Exactly. So this is the if, and there's also v-else, and there's also v-else if. And that just is Vue's way of saying show or hide.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so those are the two primary access patterns. There are a couple of other ones which handle clicks and hovers and things like that, but I don't think we have any of those, so we don't really need to go into them right now.
Gotcha. So v-card, v-system, v-row. This is some namespacing to Vue also, right?
No. So I'm glad you brought that up. So this is a little bit different. So what we were talking about earlier or just now are attributes on
right. Okay, true. Yeah.
On DOM elements, DOM components in this case. The vcard and vsystem bar, all those are other components similar to our card title component that we have registered globally, so they're available for use everywhere. In this case, they're prefixed by V just because the library that we use, Vuetify, prefixes all of their components with V. I guess that's a way of them tying into the Vue ecosystem.
Naming convention, yeah.
Saying like we are part of Vue, which
Right.
for many people they are synonymous with Vue because that is probably the #1 component design component library that is useful.
I guess if it just said system bar, maybe you would like accidentally try and look that up as like a HTML, like a part of the standard.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. The naming convention that we typically use internally for our components is we have uppercase.
Right. Yeah, I feel like from React to like this is a really common way to indicate like this is not, part of the HTML spec. This is special about us or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's we follow that spec, and we sort of mix it with the V- spec Vuetify uses. And I think there's a lot of value in that actually that allows us to differentiate the skeleton components that we're getting from our design library and combine them in an immediately visible way with the ones that we define ourselves and create.
True.
Because ours are usually any combination of maybe Vuetify components and maybe our own, and it gives us that nice little syntax differentiation.
Yeah, so I guess like putting it all together, looking right here, I can tell that V-system bar comes from the Vuetify design system because it starts with this V. This card title thing I know comes from us internally somewhere because it has this sentence case thing. And this div and like this A, I know don't belong to either of those, partially because I already know that they belong to HTML spec, but also they don't follow either of those conditions. But then, for example, this A can have in it attributes that's related to Vue because Vue is going to like parse those and render those ahead of, the HTML at some point. And that's kind of like a quick way to be able to see origins, I guess, of like these many pieces pulling together here.
Exactly. And it would operate very similarly to, for example, if you're making a Python script, you will pull in methods and classes from a number of different places. If you're creating a perfect script, you might pull in something from, pull in time from the Python spec. And you use time in whatever fashion it's used. And you also might pull in some methods from prefect to use and some decorative prefect. But you also might use URL lib or something. There's any number of things you might use, and they might all have their own sort of syntax and access patterns. But at the end of the day, they're all Python, and you can use any of those in the Pythonic way that you would, something that you had built yourself. And so the same is true here. In our case, this is Vue, and so anything that we pull in, we can use as if it were just Vue, and we access it in the same way. We can add a v-if, we can add these reactive attributes. We can also add classes, which is for anyone that's familiar with HTML, CSS, that is the styling, the way that we define styles on a given element. We can also just directly define a style with a style attribute.
I think there's one of those in here somewhere. I'm sure we'll run into it. Oh, here we go. Line 127.
There we go. So in this case, we say style equals line height 1.25 rem.
Pure CSS.
Pure CSS right there.
So pure.
So it is a very complicated but really useful way of accessing HTML ecosystem with just this amalgamation of cool tools on top of it.
Gotcha.
That gives you, at the end result, a modern front-end application.
Yeah.
So let's go through this somewhat quickly. I think we'll start with a vCard. We'll look at the two attributes there. So we have two, tile and class. As we just mentioned, class is the way that we attach some sort of styling to this, and we have predetermined classes here. So py2 and position relative. py2 tells us to give padding in the y direction. So top and bottom. And this is,
Gotcha.
and then 2, which is the just a set relative number. In this case, I think it's only like 8 pixels in each direction. And so this is a standard that we pull from our other cards. So we just copy pasted that and said, okay, well, these other ones have padding in the Y direction of 2. So we want to have that too. So it matches nicely. And then position relative is another functional class that says this has relative positioning. So anything with absolute positioning within this will be positioned relative to this. And so I apologize, some of this may be a little bit confusing for those unfamiliar with CSS, but we won't go into that too much today because I think that's
definitely like, the classes and the styling is definitely, for me, it's something that I kind of approach with a trial and error perspective at the beginning, and then usually, have to get someone with some more experience, especially when it comes to the like position relative, position absolute, like getting all the containers in the right place. I think that's something that comes with a lot of experience. So you can't just, wake up one day and get it right. But yeah, I think in the prefect code base, there's, and other code bases too, there's plenty of inspo, I guess, elsewhere. So if you're kind of adding on something new, taking a look at how the other tiles are set up is probably a great base case. And then we can jump from there. I don't think anybody needs to go completely from scratch if they have no styling experience before.
You're completely right. I think this is going to be the most unfamiliar part of this whole process for someone that's not a front-end developer. Is going to be, I think the positioning in particular is a headache for a lot of people coming
Dark
into this.
magic.
Yeah. And so if anyone is contributing something, for sure, look at our other components. They have a lot of clues as to what you may want to do. Probably if you're thinking of it, it's most likely been done before in the application somewhere. But if it's not, don't shy away from just opening a PR and just asking for some help on it. We've got a lot of people that are more than willing to help, and you don't need to have a vast knowledge of CSS to contribute to the Prefect UI in any way. So really, ping me, even ping Laura.
We will look at your Times New Roman 12-point font blue hyperlink unstyled content and help you for sure. We will happily.
Yeah. So never let that be a blocker.
Cool.
And so that's the classes on this component. And then there's another attribute called tile. And that is a specific property to vCard, and it tells it to not round the corners, because by default this rounds the corners of the card. So we say, nope, we use the tile prop. It's just a Boolean that gets passed into the component, and it tells itself what styling to use. So it has some sort of reactive properties in that component, reactive classes in that component to turn off the rounding of the edges. And then, so the vCard component is just a card as you see on the rest of the dashboard.
Just these like white background things.
Exactly. Yeah, it gives us some sort of consensus styling on the elevation, the shadow that's on that card.
Drop shadow.
Yeah, some padding and some other margins, things like that. Some very small, sort of reusable styling. That's why we use the vCard in many places. The next is the vSystem bar, which is what gives us that really nice green bar at the top of all of our cards there.
Thin little bar up here.
Exactly. And that has a number of its own access patterns and styling. In this case, it takes in a height, and we can tell it to be absolute, and that's the positioning that we talked about a little bit earlier, and a color. And so we have reactive, we tell it to be always 5 pixels high, and then we have a reactive color based on the status of our API. In this case, I believe it's green, red, and gray if it's connecting.
Right, that's from these. Card color computed, it will either be success, gray, or failed. And we mentioned before that these map to some hex colors elsewhere.
Yep. And so if you were to search in VS Code for those, you would find where they're declared. I don't know that we need to do that right now.
Sure.
Those are in some of our styling declarations.
Gotcha.
And great. So now we've talked a little bit about the card title already. So now that we've seen sort of those reactive properties, we can see where we're getting loading from and the card icon and the card color. so I won't go over those again. Next, we have the vrow. Vrow will be familiar to anyone that's used a grid system in HTML, CSS before. So I believe Bootstrap popularized this many years ago. And so this is just how we declare a row in our card title, and we have some slots on there. We give it some styling. We tell it it's the title slot of the card title component, and then we have a little API status, just rendering right there that never changes.
Oh yeah, that's exactly this, right?
It's exactly that won't change. And then we have a link or an anchor component. This is an HTML component, and that allows us to link out somewhere. In this case, we're linking to the prefect docs and configuration of environment variables. And we say target equals blank, underscore blank, to open this in a new window. We will conditionally show this link.
That's all this stuff.
That's all that stuff right there.
Really, this link is this whole thing.
It is, exactly. And yeah, go into that in just a second. This will all be shown if we're not connected. If we see we have that exclamation point connected. So it says show this if we're not connected. So this would be a good time. Let's turn off.
Disconnect.
Let's disconnect. Let's turn off the prefect architecture.
All right. Let's go over. Get my. There we go. Okay. So I'm over my other tab, and I'm going to stop all my services. And actually, now we get to see this.
Here we go. So now our component is live updating, and we see that link that we just talked about. So this is an icon link, and it has some information about what the error is. In this case, I believe it says network error, failed to fetch.
Failed to fetch, yep.
And so now we know what the error was that was returned from our query. And there's a little bit of a hint there, whether you set the variable correctly in your prefect configuration. And then if you click on that link, or click on that icon.
Clicking.
Let's see what happens.
We go to the docs.
And now we're in the prefect docs, and this will give you some information about how to configure your environment correctly before you start up the prefect server. Now, in our case, we know we've configured it correctly. We've just turned off our server.
Right. Way more helpful than the console logs, which was our only other option.
Exactly. And hopefully this will help people get started a little bit faster and without having to go to Slack every time they are having some connection issues, because I know that can be very frustrating for for many users. So if we
so that's all this stuff really, and then this V tooltip and like all these divs and spans, blah blah blah, is about setting up how this tooltip looks, basically, right?
Exactly, and so I don't think we need to go into that. That is probably oddly enough, the most complicated part of this component is probably that tooltip component there. There's some just Vuetify specifics there that I don't think we need to go into right now, but that will conditionally render some of the variables that we set up there.
Right.
Cool. So let's go to the next part.
Our row ends and our card title ends.
Yep. And so we're no longer within the context of the title. So we've.
Oh, I see. Because this little bar separates them too, so that's probably related.
That comes with, I believe that comes with the card title component.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So then we're in the bottom, the like info section, I guess.
Yeah. Now we get that nice little loading indicator, and we're letting ourselves really know where we're trying to connect to. So this section is made up of a number of components here, and that's vlist item, and all of the little components that make up the vlist item, which are avatar, content. There might be a couple others on this one.
Content.
Yep, content. And all that is those make up the structure of the vlist item component. So I won't go into those too much.
Yeah, and relatedly, it's very similar to like what's going on, for example, in this errors tile or this fail flows tile in its vlist section. So definitely, I think, compared to the other tiles too, if you're throwing in some new stuff.
Exactly. I think the best place to go whenever you're looking at building something new is seeing what's already there. There's no need to rebuild the wheel every time you create a new component.
Sure.
I certainly did not when I built this. So,
Right.
I think some of the interesting parts here is that we have the vProgress circular, which is just a loading indicator that we've seen go on and off a few times there, spinning right now. And there's some styling associated with that, but the fun part is if connecting. So that is one of our reactive properties from before, a reactive computed property, which just returns true if a couple of different conditions are met. I believe it's error and retries is less than or equal to max retries.
Yeah, that was way up here. This one, line 33.
Perfect.
Error and the retries with one. You memorized it.
I apparently have.
Yeah.
And so that the progress circular will show if it is connecting, if that condition is met. And here we get to see the velse. Velse if in the next line, or the next, 117.
117, yeah.
Yeah, in the next element. So velse if there's an error. So if there's an error, then we change and we just show an icon, which is an exclamation point, priority high.
Okay, this is the name of the icon.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, you put that into the vIcon component there.
Gotcha.
And last, velse. So this is a catch-all. So if we're not connecting and we have no errors, then we must be connected. So velse check, we're connected. And we just show green check mark. And in the next section, the v list item content, we have a very similar conditional tree here. We have a little bit of styling, and we say v if connected, should say we're connected, else if we're connecting.
Checks out.
Then we're attempting to connect, else couldn't connect. And then I think the last interesting part here is the GraphQL URL. So that's some syntax we haven't used yet. So that is the interpolated variable that is not in an attribute here. This is how we tell Vue, insert some JavaScript here, is we use those double mustache brackets.
Because that's where this localhost 4200 GraphQL is coming from, which backing up from 134, all the way up here is coming from this line 11, GraphQL URL is HTTP endpoint, which comes all the way back from line 3 at the beginning of the show. Gotcha. Okay, so that's how we're going to get it just straight into, not, as you mentioned, like not as an attribute, not as anything else, but right into the text here inside this div.
Exactly. And we can include inside of those interpolated braces there, we can include some logic as well. We can have some conditionals, we can have some JavaScript. In our case, we don't need to. We just want to say, hey, throw this string in there and render it as we've described. And so why don't we go ahead and restart the prefect dev, prefect server. And so you'll see Laura is using prefect server start --node-ui, as I believe she described earlier. Just prefect server to start without the UI, and because we want to provide our own UI.
There we go.
If we watch our UI, we should see it change.
Get everybody together.
See, we got an error right now. Oh, it's trying to connect. Let's see if we are not quite there yet.
We win or they win.
Yeah.
Yeah. Didn't make it in the 10 seconds because we're still starting up over here.
So
okay, but now the server is ready. It just passed by, but.
So I believe we should be pinging it again any second now. There we are.
Yeah, we just got it.
And so there we have our full component.
Woo! Cool. Well, thanks for giving us a tour, Nicholas, again, because we did attempt to do this before. But I think this helps a lot. You know, for me, I had no Vue experience whatsoever. And now I feel like, you know, I could actually do something. And I think getting inspiration from the other tiles, especially as, you know, relates to styling or even relates to getting something in the dashboard or what have you, is a good, you know, always a good starting spot. But I think this gives us enough info that, you know, you could contribute without totally feeling like you're hacking it. You know, even if you are lifting some styling or what have you, you get a better sense for sure of how all these things go together. So
definitely. And the styling just takes time. It comes with some practice and a lot of Googling.
Right.
And, Also searching within the project, I think, is important to understand what the functional styles that we have that exist and the classes and where those come from. So yeah, so anyone, please contribute. We are very open. We will help you get through the styling or any part that you're having difficulty with. We're here and ready to help.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching and seeing our Frankenstein together stream after the fact. Those of you who came to the initial stream, thanks again. And hope to have Nicholas on later to talk about more front end stuff, more other stuff in the future, and see everybody soon on GitHub or in the Slack too. So hope to see you all there. We'll be there. And thanks for stopping by.
Bye all.
Bye all.